Did you know that CK3 has 5, well, technically 6 hegemonies in the game? They're the title above Empire rank that only can be formed through special decision unless you use a mod, or Paradox eventually allows for custom hegemonies. I say 6 because when the Roman Empire splits, both halves become their own unique hegemons, which is nice for them. So, why are we talking about hegemonies again? Because I thought it would be interesting to see what would happen if we give all 5 control over the entire CK3 map, and test how each performs when placed in charge of an absurd amount of land. Each will start with a single culture, single faith, and full control of every county to keep things as fair as possible. We've also removed the Mongols so that they don't ruin the experiment. Right now, my money is on Dar al-Islam being the most stable, since the title also serves as a head of faith and cannot be dismantled by fellow followers of Muslim faiths. But we shall see how this little experiment plays out. So where's Dar al-Islam? Well, they're right here. They kind of had a more boring time lapse, so they just get a quick little highlight. Did you know that if you give the entire world to Rome and then let the AI do its thing, the empire will eventually sunder itself and split in an extremely lopsided way? The western portion ends up with only around 900 counties, while the east walks away with a roughly 2,500. I'm not sure how you could make this division more equal without physically moving the line of separation, but it's still a fascinating outcome to see in CK3. So after 528 years of in-game time, what has the AI done in this alternative history where Rome conquered the world? The empire survived until about 933, when it split into two, which, as mentioned, heavily favors the east. Since then, the borders between the two states have not changed much, because both Romes are using administrative government type, meaning they are only able to seize a duchy from each other at a time. At the moment, the East is attempting for the 16th time, that's a pretty big number, to take the Duchy of Calabria. Another strange development in this time-lapse is that nearly all of the rulers have reverted back to old Hellenic paganism. Once the first generation of new Roman emperors died, nearly every successor seemed to prefer the old ways. There are also a handful of other faiths that have reached noticeable thresholds across the map. Culture, we do see some movement away from Greek. Norse is one of the more surprising cultures to pop up around the Black Sea, along with several diverged Greek cultures throughout the Mediterranean. The biggest surprise for me, though, is how often the realms have shifted away from administrative government. For example, why is South France suddenly part of celestial government? That traces back to Emperor Augustus Daniel in 1307, who granted the land to a character whose ancestor goes all the way back to 877. So what did we learn from this time lapse? After the Sundering, both hegemons remained remarkably stable. That's partially because the administrative government can't dissolve their primary title, but it's still surprising that aside from the nomadic region breaking away early, no other major areas attempted independence. I'm not sure if that's due to the homogeneous nature of the two hegemons or simply because they're too powerful for anyone to seriously scheme against. Next up in our series of world-spanning hegemons is Dar al-Islam, probably one of the most stable nations we'll see. Its succession almost always stays within the family, since it's also a head of faith title, meaning there's no civil wars to destabilize the nation. After the initial loss of the land that were too nomadic in nature, the title passed smoothly through 25 different rulers. Interesting, the capital of Dar al-Islam ended up all the way in the east. Faith-wise, most of the world remained Ashar, but for some reason, a large part of former Byzantine Empire adopted Jingshao and another Confucius faith. They likely happened because the AI granted those lands early on to a Han character who already followed Jingshao at the start of this time lapse. Internally, the realm is mostly divided into large empires with a few random duchies belonging to other empires of not the same de jure. Clan is the dominant government type alongside a handful of nomadic tribes. Strangely, Pomerania ended up as administrative government, possibly because its liege was celestial and gave them the option to convert from clan to administrative. Development does not seem to have played a huge role overall, though that might partially be because the Black Plague had just finished its run around 1354. Finally, let's look at how good the AI is creating the perfect heir. For the most part, they're just okay. After 514 years, the best character in the world only averages around 27 points in their stats. That's mostly because they have 57 learning, which seems to be the dominant stat thanks to widespread culture of Masharik that has the philosopher culture trait. So, what did we learn from Dar al-Islam world domination? It seems that AI can hold on to a massive realm as long as there are no pretenders, no dissolution mechanic, and the title has de jure claimant over the entire map. While rulers can still be overthrown by a tyrannical war, the next person in line will usually be from the same family and will retain most of the hegemon's power. It would be interesting to see what happens if multiple Dar al-Islam style titles existed at once. That might finally reveal that external pressures alone would truly destroy a title like this. How did the Khaganate do with control of the entire map? Not very well. After the first generation, it completely exploded. It didn't even last 40 years before falling apart, succumbing to a dissolution almost immediately. But where there is collapse, there is also growth. In the east, multiple Chinese hegemons rose to fill the gap, while the west, there are several powerful empires, but not a single unifying realm. This might be the first time a Jewish faith has controlled so much of the map, all thanks to Emperor Tagai converting to Rabbinism. Over 1,200 counties have somehow been converted overtaking Tengri, which once dominated all the lands. Mongolian culture also seems to diverge far more than usual, likely as a result of the hegemon collapse, with many groups wanting to become head of their own cultures. Despite that, the dominant language still remains Mongolic. The strongest realm at the end are the Pagan Kingdom, West Slavic, and finally the Empire of China. What surprised me the most is how developed much of the steppe is compared to what usually you see in these kinds of time lapses. For example, Constantinople sits at 100 development, but so do several counties in the Buryati Kingdom. What did we learn from this time lapse? Maybe starting as a nomadic was a mistake. Feels like either a celestial or meritocratic Khaganate would have resulted in a much better and more stable empire. In the end, everyone did eventually become celestial anyway, so AI probably had the opportunity to make the switch earlier on. It also feels unfair that Rome and Dar al-Islam receive a de jure claim on the entire map when formed, while India, China, and the Khaganate only receive regional claims. That limit seems unnecessary and unfair compared to the other decisions. Similar to the Khaganate, India did not survive past the first generation. I think this is largely due once again to the Mandela government type not being suited for a world-spanning nation. We did see several massive China hegemons rise and fall, especially the last one, which stretched from Persia all the way to the northern edge of the map. But in the end, Scandinavia emerged as the true winner, and surprisingly, as a feudal government of all things. The dominant faith is still a Hindu one, with Jiangsu in a distant second place, mostly present in parts of Persia and Iberia for some strange reason. Even more surprisingly, Mandala government still exists, but only in Indonesia and the British Isles, while most other realms have become feudal or clan government types. That caught me off guard considering how much land remained to Gong, which you'd expect to be more resistant to change under such a homogeneous culture. Development overall is concentrated in only a few regions: Tibet, India, and parts of Europe. The steppe has almost none, largely due to the nomadic government and local county control. Once again, we don't see a high number of genius, Herculean, or beautiful characters. I'm not sure if the recent updates have made it much harder for the AI to consistently choose stronger heirs. What did we learn from this time lapse? Much like the Khaganate, if India had started with a different government type, it might have had a real chance to succeed. But once the first generation passed, the Indian hegemon was effectively doomed. It collapsed so thoroughly that it never even came close to reforming, even when China later controlled most of the land to recreate it. Watching China rise and fall multiple times during this time lapse was incredible. By my count, we saw 6 different iterations of Chinese hegemon over 528 years, with the Qing dynasty in 1180 nearly restoring most of the world under the mandate of heaven. Outside of China, the world looks surprisingly orderly, largely following the de jure empire and kingdom borders, with only a few exceptions. Seeing Germany, Lithuania, Sorbia, Pomerania, and Frisia all neatly divided is a rare sight. In terms of faith, nearly everyone in this alternate CK3 timeline follows either Confucianism, Taoism, or Buddhism. Han remains the dominant culture, though one Kong culture appears as a random Norse hybrid. Almost every realm outside the steppe has remained celestial government type, which is no surprise. We can practically trace the Silk Road by following the paths of high development across the map, though the Black Plague dampens the effect, especially with Central Persia being hit extremely hard. Interestingly, the de jure drift of the Chinese hegemon hasn't progressed nearly as much as I expect, maybe due in part because they can't control the neighboring empires long enough for it to happen. Army sizes are also fairly modest outside of China. Next largest powers are the Khaganate with 64k troops, Germany with 56k, and Zenji with 48k. One of the things that wasn't mentioned about the other hegemons is the sheer number of mercenary groups or adventurers: 389 adventuring companies, some with histories stretching back hundreds of years. So what did we learn from this time lapse? The AI is terrible at maintaining China, but surprisingly good at rebuilding it, only to let it collapse again. AI seems to repeatedly trigger eras of division, mainly by appointing low merit rulers and not being able to maintain their legitimacy. Plague and natural disasters certainly doesn't help either, though that is largely outside the AI's control. That's all we have for our 5 hegemon time-lapse. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, tell a friend. Maybe tell another friend, and then tell that friend to tell another friend, so that we have, like, you know, a couple 100,000 people watching us at any given point. That'd be pretty sick. But that's all. Ciao, guys.